Welcome back. So now we're going to talk about business history from a medieval perspective. And one kind of the overarching theme I want you to think about is during the medieval times, the church was generally intolerant of profit-seeking behavior. In fact, the church said that merchants should only charge a just price for their wares in lieu of a market price. So let's talk about a just price. A just price means that a merchant or someone selling a good charges a price that is inspired by fairness, not greed. So what you think about that is, and some people call this a more modern lingo, you might call this a cost plus model. So you look at the cost of the materials and then whatever you think is a fair price for the labor that went into that. And of course, these prices were typically set by trade guilds. These were master craftsmen, carpenters, stonemasons, etc. And they would say, well, when you make a table, the cost of your labor to make that table is worth this amount of money plus however much the materials cost for you. So prices were in many ways actually kind of fixed because it was inspired by this degree of fairness. Contrast that with what we call a more common pricing mechanism, the market price. And the market price, of course, is that determined by the intersection of a supply and demand curve. Most of us take this market price for granted, yet we do see the just price in certain circumstances. I mean, have you ever been, I love haggling. Have you ever been to a flea market and you tell the guy you're haggling with, hey, how much for that cup you're trying to sell? And they say $1. And it's like, okay, no, how about, 25 cents? And then you kind of get to that point where it's around 60 cents and the guy says, hey man, come on, I gotta eat too. And I'm such a sucker for that argument because I know the cup isn't really worth 60 or 75 cents, but then for some reason I have this moment of weakness and so I pay the just price instead of the market price. Okay, that's kind of a colloquial example. Another thing that the Catholic Church condemned was the practice of usury. And usury basically means you lend money for interest. Now, because the Catholic Church condemned usury, that meant that capital markets didn't really exist in any significant form. In fact, the only people that were operating as money lenders predominantly were the Jewish community because they were outside the Catholic Church. And because of the fact that they were able to loan money for interest, this led to a lot of historical levels of persecution against Jews. Now, we think, well, it makes sense though. Isn't it kind of wrong to charge interest for money? Well, there were other arrangements used to raise money, and they're a lot worse than charging interest. Indentured servitude was a common mechanism. This was one way that people sent laborers to the New World, but it also is something that existed throughout Europe. The idea was, I don't have any money, so therefore I will sell myself into your slavery to pay off my debt for a period of X number of years. And if I manage to survive this period of slavery, my debt is paid off and maybe I get some sort of land or property at the end of it. So actually usury is much less cruel than the other alternatives that were available at that time. So great. We've talked about the medieval world. Our next video, we're going to talk about the Renaissance and then the colonial era. I'll see you then.